Good afternoon, everybody. We're about to begin in a couple minutes. We're just going to let some people access the webinar, and then we'll get started here pretty soon. All right, just a few more minutes. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. Good morning to the West Coasters. Good afternoon to everybody else. My name is Peter Thompson. I will be your moderator today. I handle all the programs and activities for the Biomass Thermal Energy Council. And welcome to this presentationary webinar of the Wood Energy Financial Calculator. A little bit later, we'll have a demonstration of the calculator. But before we get started, I just wanted to go through a few housekeeping items. And so to access the audio for the webinar, there are two audio options that you can access on the menu on the right-hand side of your screen. And you select through your computer or through telephone. The best signal is typically through your landline. So if you just select one of those options, it'll prompt you with some instructions on how to access the landline or computer option. Throughout the webinar, we welcome you to ask any questions of the presenters about what they will be discussing. To do that, you will do that in the menu on the right side. It says questions. Just type your questions in there. If you have a specific question for one of the presenters, please specify which presenter you'd like to answer that question if you have a preference. The webinar will be available afterwards. We're recording it, and we will also have a copy of the presentation for your records. And with that, let's get into the meat of the presentation. We'll get started with a welcome and introduction presented by Jeff Surface of VTech Executive Director. After Jeff concludes his presentation, we'll move into the Wood Energy Financial Calculator project background. That's presented by Dr. Dennis Becker of the University of Idaho. And then after Dr. Becker concludes his presentation, we'll have a short presentation about the industry's perspective on this tool. And then Bede will have a calculator demonstration. And Bede Welford is with Viessmann and VTech Board Director. And then afterwards, we'll get to your questions and hopefully have some answers for you. With that, I would like to move into the first presentation. That would be a welcome and introduction by Jeff Surface. BTEC Executive Director. Jeff, you can go ahead and take it away.
Okay, thank you, Peter. It's good to be here with everybody. I also extend a welcome on behalf of the Biomass Thermal Energy Council. We are an organization with over 60 members representing all aspects of the biomass thermal industry, everything from pellet and chip producers to stove and appliance producers, universities, and other stakeholders engaged in the desire to advance the sustainable use of wood and agricultural biomass for clean, efficient heat and combined heat and power to meet America's energy needs and to strengthen local economies. We are working hard on behalf of industry, we staff and the members themselves within the committee structure of our organization to achieve some successes in the policy area and in the technical and regulatory area. We're getting close to securing the kind of tax credits long obtained by much of the rest of the renewable energy industries through passage of the Biomass Thermal Utilization Act, the BTU Act, which would either be combined with other tax legislation or a standalone legislation to give tax credits for high efficiency wood heating. We thought we were there towards the end of last year, and indeed this has been a multi-year effort, and we're of course victim to the discussions of the importance of tax extenders and tax credits, and we're also a victim of the congressional scheduling and indeed the administration's interest in some of these issues. So stay tuned for that, but it's an important focal point for our organization. We're also working hard to get funding for a program that's been authorized for several years within the Farm Bill, previous Farm Bills, to fund at a greater level the authorization that has existed, the Community Wood Energy Program. And we work with regional partners and state organizations to advance state policy as well. Bede Welford, who is part of this webinar, chairs our Technical and Regulatory Affairs Committee. Last year, the group and contractors completed the development of a new wood boiler efficiency standard, which is now ready for adoption by ANSI or ASHRAE or an organization capable of owning it. We are in the process of completing the first wood chip standard, and we're working with ASHRAE to have biomass heating included in green building standards, including work with the Green Buildings Council. These are all efforts to promote the expansion of the biomass thermal industry. The third area that we're working hard on is really education and outreach. And this year we are doing that more by supporting other events rather than holding our own annual conference. The next one coming up is Biomass Magazine's International Biomass Conference and Expo in Atlanta. Soon after that is an annual Heating the Midwest Conference in Minnesota. And later in the summer is PFI's annual conference. We'll be speaking at each of those. We are considering and trying to organize something around the Wood Stove Challenge this fall with the Alliance for Green Heat. And we publicize grant opportunities and disseminate other news of interest. I'll just close my presentation here by saying that it's long been felt that engineers and architects that specify building, heating, and cooling systems could be encouraged to consider biomass equipment with all the benefits of local jobs and environment if they had an app or a computer-based tool to allow them to do a simple, high-level cost comparison of the alternatives, either in a new installation or in a retrofit situation. Such a tool has been developed by BTEC with support from the U.S. Forest Service, and so we're here today to announce to you and others its completion and to introduce you to it. So, Peter, I think that's my introduction. Back to you.
All right, thank you, Jeff. And with that, we're going to move into the Wood Energy Financial Calculator introduction by Dr. Dennis Becker. Dr. Becker is the Policy Analysis Group Director in the College of Natural Resources and Associate Professor at the University of Idaho. Dr. Becker's research focuses on policy development and evaluation, resource assessment, and analysis of social and economic impacts in the areas of forest resources, fisheries, and wildlife, and they range and community energy systems. Dr. Becker was part of the original team that created the Wood Energy Financial Calculator, and he will provide you with a little bit of background on how this project got started. Dr. Becker, I hand the presentation over to you.
Thanks a lot, Peter, and thanks for having me today. It's really exciting to see this this development of several years of hard work by a lot of good folks. So around 2012, when I was at the University of Minnesota, we were working with a number of communities, hospitals, schools, and those individuals were really struggling to understand how to use wood in local schools and such situations. They were motivated by a desire to invest in local forest products industry. They were interested in reducing hazardous fields perhaps around their community. Most importantly, a lot of them were quite honestly struggling financially with high heating costs, particularly in places that were not served by natural gas. So we were working with a number of communities, both in the Midwest as well as in the Western U.S., and they were struggling to find good information about how these systems work, just the basic engineering, but also just the basic cost functions that are associated with these systems. They had very limited resources, very limited financial resources at their disposal to hire the consultants and that expertise to help them through this process. You know, at a very basic level, you know, as these conversations were happening in school board meetings and other locations, you know, very basic questions about, is this a $5,000 investment? Is it a $50,000 investment? Is this a $5 billion investment? They really had no idea of what they were getting into, only that they liked this idea of trying to do well by the community and reducing those heating costs. And so we really saw an opportunity there to help them with really what we'd like to call sort of pre-screening or that early feasibility stage. And so up on the screen you see a diagram adopted from the International District Energy Association that really sort of depicts the risk and uncertainty that's associated with projects like this. And we really sought to help with the early stages there. If you can see the screen in front of you, you know, understanding how these fit into the local economics, understanding who within the community needs to be involved in terms of not just the suppliers and the engineers, but what other individuals need to be involved in terms of social acceptability, and then helping them with that initial project launch and helping them to screen and think through a variety of project scenarios. So what we were also observing was that, you know, they maybe had $25,000 or $50,000 at their disposal to do some feasibility analysis. And so, you know, very good consultants would come in, but, you know, with limited resources was able to provide them some information, but then their financial resources were shot and they had really no means to continue on with the conversation. So maybe the feasibility analysis showed that their initial idea just didn't make much sense, or that it was just didn't pencil out. And so then what? Well, then the conversation goes away and they go and they invest in the traditional boiler that they had in the school, and then the opportunity for wood energy really dissipates very quickly at that point. So we embarked on this effort to try to, with the Pacific Northwest Research Station and funding from the U.S. Forest Service, we really sought to provide a simple tool that would help them through those early stages of project planning, to help them think about and optimize and game different scenarios. If they could, you know, in really short order, ideally with no investment of money, dispose of those project ideas that just really were not good ideas, then that would really allow them to take those resources and invest them more efficiently in ideas that perhaps had legs. And so what we did at the University of Minnesota at the time was we embarked on this effort to collect as much data as we could about existing installations across the country. So those being chip boilers, pellet boilers, as well as cordwood boilers, in as many locations as we could, and to use this information to create cost curves and cost functions to basically predict what's within some range of variability, of course, what particular sizes of systems might cost for a particular installation. And so that's really where we ended up with the Wind Energy Financial Calculator. If you go to the next slide, so this is just a basic a rendering of an earlier version. But what we were trying to do here was to provide a calculator that combined two elements, two design features of sort of a TurboTax approach, where somebody with very little understanding of these systems, sort of picture the school secretary or the principal or the superintendent or the dentist that sits on the school board or the hospital administrators that are the ones that are around these tables and having these conversations. And without having the same level of expertise as, say, the consultants, they would still be able to, with some basic information, populate some cells within this sort of TurboTax approach to understanding what a system might cost and what the size of that system is. And then combining that with sort of a National Geographic approach where we provide simple stories, lots of pictures. And so we have a variety of community biomass handbooks that are sort of companions to the early version of this model, of this calculator. But all of that was really an attempt to tell a story and to help with that education through those early stages. And so just a real quick story I'd like to share is it's up in northern Minnesota, and we were working with a fairly remote school district and with a school finance director, and she was very nervous about this conversation. She didn't know anything about forestry. She didn't know anything about biomass, but she knew a lot about what they were spending on a monthly basis for propane heating in their schools and their various buildings on campus. Within about 15 minutes of this sort of demonstration that we gave them, she ripped the iPad out of my hand and she started gaming all sorts of scenarios, trying to figure out how to reduce their costs, and whether or not they should trench a bunch of line to the neighboring old gymnasium and heat that as well, and all the various scenarios that you can imagine and probably have seen yourselves. Within 20 minutes, we were able to determine that it probably wasn't a good idea to do some of those things that a lot of people have been talking about and sort of connecting buildings together, that financially, it was maybe not the best option. But what they were able to find out was that by investing in maybe two separate boilers in those buildings that were a long way, they were basically 2-3 blocks away. So very small installations, it was just not going to make sense. In other installations, maybe it would have. But we were able to help the school board understand the scenario in a much different way. Fast forward, they could take their very limited resources and then hire that consultant to allow them to look at a more constrained number of scenarios, which then they ultimately did and ended up purchasing and investing in a smaller wood boiler systems for each of those installations. So that was sort of our desire, was to create this tool that would facilitate that sort of thinking. Fast forward again to 2014, we were working with the Minnesota statewide wood energy team, the Oregon statewide wood energy team, the Colorado team, as well as outreach with BTEC and other industry partners. And through those efforts, we figured out where the calculator was deficient, where we needed to improve certain functionality. And so we set forth on trying to improve some of that, but also, more importantly, trying to expand the use of the calculator in various scenarios that made sense. Through that partnership, eventually then led to the transfer of the calculator to to BTEC and the industry partners associated. So with Peter, I guess I'd hand that back to you now.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Becker. That was a great presentation on the origins of the calculator. Now we're going to move on to a presentation on the industry's perspective, and then a demonstration of the calculator. And while I introduce our next speaker, Bede Welford, I'm actually going to hand the presentation off the control to him so he can actually open up the calculator and show you guys how it works and provide a demonstration. So bear with us for just a couple of moments. And Bede, I'm about to hand over the presentation to you. And then, okay, so Mr. Welford was a key player in the field of energy recovery ventilation. He's served on many committees and helped set the industry standards of the Underwriters Laboratory, Canadian Standards Association, and Home Ventilating Institute. Beat is now with Viessmann Manufacturing Company as the Renewable and Sustainable Business Development Manager, and Viessmann is one of the world's leading manufacturers of efficient, reliable, and affordable heating and solar products. Their innovative solutions are simple to install and service and use. Bede, I'm going to hand over the presentation to you now, and we can get a little bit more perspective on the new calculator and show these people how it works.
Okay, does everybody see my smiling mug?
We see you, Bede.
All right. So thank you very much for that introduction, Peter. And good morning to the West Coast. Good afternoon to all the rest of us. Appreciate you being here with us today. I'm going to do several things here. Try to give you a little bit of the industry perspective, the rationale, why we think this is a good thing, and how we might be able to take advantage of it. And then talk about a couple of examples, a retrofit example and a new construction example that are real-world projects, and for which I simply went into the calculator and plugged in some really quick numbers just to illustrate how this can help us move down the pathway to developing a project. And then finally, we'll close out this presentation and actually go live on the website and take a look at how to use the calculator itself, different things we can do to play with the tool. And with that, launching into the industry perspective. So a big deal for us, you know, we're not the biggest player in heating in the United States today, unlike Austria, where something like 40% of all new construction is heated with wood. Interesting. The challenge for us is this why. Why would we even think about biomass thermal? Why should we consider it for either renovation or new construction? So there are many reasons for that. Some of them have been alluded to in Jeff's introduction, certainly with regard to contribution to local economies. I live in the Northeast, in the state of Maine, and when we use wood for heating, all those dollars, almost without exception, stay in state and circulate in the local economy. When we heat with fuel oil, number 2 oil, or even propane, the majority of those dollars go immediately out of state and sometimes out of the country. So that's a big deal for us. Carbon footprint is also important. And I just mentioned wood heating is near carbon neutral, or carbon beneficial, if you will. We do use some fossil fuels to harvest wood and process it and transport it, but for the most part, the rest of that carbon circulates in the carbon cycles. So we grow new trees, we capture it, we release it, and it would be released anyway. So carbon footprint's a real reason. Utilization of waste stream. In some areas, just need to get rid of wood waste, sawdust, from milling operations is a driver. And finally, and the U.S. Forest Service, of course, very interested in this, we do need markets for low-grade timber in order to fund timber stand management. So that's another thing that helps drive why biomass. However, probably the most important one is economics. For the actual heating users, the building managers, operators, facility managers, their heating costs are a huge part of their budget, particularly in the northern tier of the U.S. And so regardless of all the other factors that may be important, projects that don't pencil, if you will, or don't make sense economically, generally aren't done. So with that said, the ability to quickly gauge the economics of a particular situation, particular project, is critical to removing barriers to considering that project and getting on with life, moving to the next step. The wood energy financial calculator provides an easy-to-use tool that responds to that need. If this encourages users to move forward and initiate specific projects with designers, contractors, ESCOs, or equipment suppliers themselves, it has fulfilled its purpose. Similarly, and actually this goes back to something that Dennis mentioned, if the tool dissuades a potential customer because the economics just don't work, that's also a good thing. We don't need to spend our time on a dry hole. That saves the potential user's time. It saves me time as a manufacturer charged with selling biomass installations and projects. So that's also a good thing. Finally, it's nice to have something, particularly in the financial world, that's not coming from me as an equipment manufacturer. So a third-party tool does help to engender some trust in the user. To the extent that that tool mirrors what we're already telling our prospects, it gives them more confidence in what we talk about. And engineers and architects can use this tool independent of a particular supplier or a particular system to illustrate potential to their clients. Then they can go on to say, well, this is what I recommend and this is why. Even contractors who, for the most part, are less familiar with biomass economics can employ the tool to interest customers and develop or support specific proposals. For us and for our customers, the important outcome is to get the prospects in the door and qualify their project. We take over and be successful from there. So that's a little bit of our perspective, why this tool is important. So I mentioned I'd talk about a couple of projects. What I did was took an existing retrofit project. This case is a junior-senior high school in Holton, Maine. For those of you familiar with Maine, this is in the county, Aroostook County, the northernmost county in the state. And this is a place where people are very familiar with wood. They're familiar with making paper. They're familiar with forestry. So an interesting opportunity. What I did was simply go into the tool and very quickly, probably took 10, 15 minutes, tried to replicate after the fact what the tool would have told us. So a couple of screenshots here. You can see that this project was fueled with chips. The 80% efficiency is not 0.8%. There's an issue there. Peter, maybe you want to make note. It's 80% efficiency. That's a default in the tool. It's pretty accurate in this case. We say 85% the way we measure it here, but it's close enough. Moisture content of the chips, 40%. These are forest chips. And so given the county and the number of months that we were doing heating, the tool spits out a usage and a system size. And this was my check on this. Is this where the tool would have taken me? Because that's almost exactly the size of that particular boiler, 3.5 NBTU per hour. The next screenshot shows the biomass fuel cost. The remaining fuel cost you see here, we're really only gunning for about 50% of the total energy bill, dollar bill. More than that for the actual percentage of the heating being done, but not all of it being done with wood. It shows the additional operation and maintenance cost, debt payments, and so on. And for this case, this is the real nut of it. Had I used this tool up front to qualify the project with these very simple inputs, simple payback of 3 years, and with financing 3.7 years. So that's pretty drastic, pretty important project, and would have told me to go ahead. For those of you that are not familiar with some of these, this is what a wedge floor system for storing and retrieving wood chips looks like. And on the left, you can see the actual walking floor truck, that floor truck unloading chips into the floor. This is the initial delivery of chips. that we used for commissioning the boiler. And this is a picture of the boiler looking from the back side. What you're seeing right here is a cyclone, which takes some of the dust out of the exhaust. And this is the engineer congratulating the soon-to-be boiler operator on their new system, just to put a little life into it. Similarly, you can use the tool now for new construction. This is one of the things that Dr. Becker and our web folks have added to the tool, the ability to model new construction. And here I backed into it by adjusting the square footage. You'll see this when we look at the tool to end up with about the same installed system size. So we're looking at just under 4 million BTU here. If I backed into it with a couple 100,000 square feet. So this is a new gymnasium and indoor track, lockers, offices, weight rooms, etc. facility at Plymouth State University. I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. But here, these were pellets. And again, we'll talk about why that is. Even though this is a very large system, it's pellet fuels because all of the equipment had to be on the second floor of the building. This is new construction, but it is in the 100-year floodplain, and therefore nothing critical can be on the first floor. So everything on the second floor meant that we couldn't do chips. It had to be pellets. So you can see the moisture content of the pellets, again, 80% efficiency comes in there, but the size of the system, about 4 million BTU. The actual size is 4 million in 2 boilers. Again, see some of these costs in here. This is what the biomass fuel costs are going to be. In this case, there's no fossil fuel. This building operates completely on wood fuel, which is interesting, and that's another reason why we have 2 boilers here, not 1, so there's some redundancy in the system. You can see the debt payment, the total expense, and the value, the system cost per BTU, under $10. This system penciled very cleanly. This is what the building looks like from the outside, built in 2010. And here's a picture of the 2 boilers. Both of them have been rated at 2 million BTU input by adjusting the controls for the purposes of permitting in the state of New Hampshire. Great installation, has been up and running for about 5 years now. Okay, so I'm going to get out of the presentation now by exiting like that, and take you to the actual website. I'm on the website right now at the Wood Energy Financial Calculator on the home page, and you'll see an introduction here. I won't read the introduction to you. I invite you to get in here and put the tool yourself at your convenience. But the introduction does give a little background, and of course there are important things here. We want to acknowledge all of those who contributed to the development, and of course the U.S. Forest Service, part of the USDA, Pacific Northwest Research, and our friends from University of Minnesota, Colorado State Forestry, and so on. So that's the home page. But to get right into it, you'll see on the left-hand side here different steps. Step 1, characterizing the existing system, characterizing biomass, fuel cost savings, financial inputs, and financial results. Right? So I'm just going to go in and start playing with this with you, give you an idea. of how to use the calculator. Excuse me. So you'll see the thing that pops up is the state. So I'm going to pick Maine because that's where I am. And then another drop-down menu gives you the county. So in this case, I'm going to pick Oxford, which is the next county to the west of where I am sitting. But what are we doing when we do that? We're actually selecting weather data. So it'll help drive sizing and help drive fuel usage and savings and so forth. The next thing you see is drop-down menu for the type of fuel you're currently using. Or in a new construction project, this would be the type of fuel that you may use for backup. So in this case, I'm going to look at a project, another chip project in the high school that had number 2 heating oil. It is a retrofit project, so I'm going to leave that box unchecked. Now the cost per gallon. We'll come back and play with this, but at the time, let's say it was $3 a gallon. It's been below 2, it's coming back up toward 3 right now. Excuse me. Yeah. Are we going to do domestic water? I'll say yes. It's only going to let me do a maximum of 100 people, so it's probably not extremely accurate in that sense, but we'll leave it there. 24 hours a day. And now months of operation. So at least in Maine, we started heating in October. So add October, November, and December to this list. And then you'll see down here, heating annual fuel usage. So this is a very important spot in using this tool, especially for retrofit cases. Gallons of fuel used per year is probably the best indicator of system size. So this is one of the advantages of using the tool, is that you're going to base your sizing for your biomass system and the balance of the system, not on a rule of thumb where you put in twice the capacity you needed or even 3 times the capacity you needed, but actually what are you using? I apologize, but the dry throat creeping in here. So 100,000 gallons, pretty good number for high school up here, and that gives us our cost. So that completes the existing heating system portion. Now we can come back and play with some of these things in a minute and see what kind of impacts they have. Next, I'll move on to the biomass system design. So in this case, we're talking about chips. They'll default 30%, but these are forest chips, so we're probably going to say that they're on average about 40%, just to be conservative. You'll see that it automatically selects 80% efficiency. It's correct here. 0.8 is 80%, not 0.8%, as we pointed out earlier. And it's going into its database and actually plugging a system bus. You'll see that right here. So for the unsophisticated or early in the process user, you don't even have to decide what it's going to cost to build this plant. It's going to pick some numbers for you from a database and do the first cut that way. You can click allow the boiler cost to be edited and put that number right here. So if I thought it wasn't 600,000, it was 800,000, I could put that. Oops, not 8 million, thank you. $800,000. And you'll see it shows up right here. Additional operation and maintenance costs, and here I would say, I've been in the industry long enough to have heard people say, oh, it's no more work than an oil boiler. Well, that's gilding the lily a little bit. So let's add some labor costs here a couple hours a week for 40 weeks. Let's call it $2,000, right? And I put in a budget of another $1,000 a year on average for parts and supplies that you may need. You know, you may have to replace the oxygen sensor every 2 or 3 years, something like that. You can have distribution costs if you need them, but in this case, with one building, you didn't need to look at any of those things. Well, just one building right here. Okay. So there's our inputs for the system. Let me go scroll back up here, and we'll go and talk about fuel. So you'll see here two numbers, a cost per ton and the cost per dry ton. So remember, we put in 40% moisture for the chips. So if we can buy chips for $55 a green ton, the actual cost per dry ton is $92, and that gives us a cost per million, per 100,000 BTUs. All right. So we know how many green tons we're going to use. This tells us how many truckloads of fuel we'll have to take, and this passes the sniff test for the project that I have in mind. Right. And we're done. So we can go look at the financial inputs. Total system cost $800,000. Any other contributions we could actually put in here. If you had a grant, you could put that number in here. Interest rate 3%. It's probably going to be 4% now. Discount rate of 6%. Project lifespan, we like these projects to be 30 years. So I'm going to put that number in. And then go and look at the financial results. So you can see, even being somewhat conservative, I made the system more expensive than the defaults in the program. I put in some maintenance costs, some operator costs, and I'm still showing a simple payback of just under 4 years and a payback with interest, with the whole financial model in, of 5.3 years. So this is a great way to start out with real numbers, with real information that you can put in that, as Nana said, is the stuff that's accessible to an administrator at a school, at a hospital, or another municipal facility, or even an accountant at a manufacturing firm. You can go in here pretty quickly, run through it, and come up with something that says, "Oh, this could really make sense." Now you can go back and refine it and get more information. So now that I'm here, let's talk about some what-if games that we might be able to play. Let's go back and say this system was chips, right? But we know that chip system is probably more expensive because we could store pellets in a silo and have them deliver gravity. So why don't I change that to pellets? It's going to default to moisture content of 6%, which is about right for the US. And now when I go to fuel cost savings, I'm not going to buy pellets at $55 a ton, bulk delivery. I might have to pay $220 to get those delivered. You can see the cost per dry ton is not very different because they're very dry to begin with. Now if we go to the financial results, look what happened to the payback period. Still acceptable for a municipality, but double the length of time. Pretty close to double the amount of time. So that illustrates the difference between pellets and chips. Okay. Similarly, if we go back to the biomass system design, I'm going to go back to my previous example of chips and 40%. I'm going to go back to my cost per ton of $55. But now I'm going to go look at the actual boiler cost, and I now have put the thing out to bid, and the best number I got wasn't 800,000, but it was $1 million. Right? So now I put my $1 million cost, not my $800,000 I thought I could do it for that cost in, and go take a look at the financial results. And lo and behold, they're not as good as they were with the lower cost, no surprise there, but they're still better than doing the system for pellets, even though I spent more money to build the system that would handle the chips. To build one of those, I put another $200,000 in there to build that mesh floor, for example. So this gives you a little bit of a feel for some of the things you can do. That's a pretty good day around. Oh, the last thing I can show you is you have a little summary here that shows up as you're doing these manipulations. And finally, once you're happy with what you've done, you can generate a report. And here it is. So this is for an existing heating system. There's my state and county, the summary of all the things we put in. Right? Oops. All right. Our months of operation, we're using 90%. We can change that number. Summary of the fuel, the cost of the fuel, boiler costs, our labor and maintenance costs. And again, this is only 3 pages long, but it really summarizes, or excuse me, 4 pages long. It really summarizes what you need to know. And finally, where the rubber meets the road right here with the payback period, simple payback, and payback with interest. So this is something that the financial people can look at and say, okay, you put in real numbers, you reflected the quote, now we can make a go, no-go decision. So I would say the tool can be used at multiple steps in the process. Very early on to do that instant pre-qualification, and then as the project develops, even right up to the final point of accepting a bid and putting the real numbers for construction into the model and refine it that way. Dennis mentioned project examples. If you click this button, it'll take you to a collection of database that's maintained by the Biomass Energy Resource Council in the state of Vermont. So I won't take time to go through that now. But that's a quick run through of how to use the calculator itself. And with that, I think I will stop and see if we've accumulated any questions.
All right, thank you, Bede. That was a great presentation and demonstration of this newly designed and updated calculator. Before we get to your questions, and right now we don't really have any questions, so I'm going to give you some more time to type your questions in, and I will like to remind everybody that BTEC is a membership-based organization, and we rely on the support of our members to make webinars like this one possible. We provide our members with representation in Washington, D.C. We lead technical and regulatory advances for the industry. We offer a platform to connect with other industry leaders, and we educate consumers, policymakers, and the public about biomass thermal or modern wood heating. Please consider supporting our work and webinars like this, and visit our website. You'll have to access this new calculator. Next week, this calculator will be live on our completely newly redesigned BTEC website. That'll be next week. We'll have a press release when that happens, and you'll be able to use this calculator for any potential projects that you're considering. And if you want more information about BTEC, you can contact Jeff, Surface, or myself with any questions you may have about BTEC or the Wood Energy Financial Calculator. And it looks like we have a few questions coming in, so we'll get to those questions right now. First question, can the calculator be applied to any country except the U.S.? I would say no at this point. When you go to the beginning of the calculator and you're specifying the location of, I don't know if you can go to step 1B, but when you go to the select your location for the calculator, there are no other countries besides U.S. states and counties. So this is not an international calculator. It's meant for U.S. domestic purposes. Okay.
And yeah, that's correct. The only thing I would add to that is that if you're familiar with bin data and you are in a location where you can find a comparable U.S. location, so I'm not sure what a good example would be, but if you were in England, you might go to Washington State and pick a county that is on the coast. So you're very similar to what you'd find in Southwest England, and you can look at the bin data. If the bin data was close to matching, you could use the tool, in a very rough way that way. But as far as the actual weather data that's behind this, it is for the U.S. only. It was funded by the U.S. Forest Service.
Yeah, and that's right, Pete. Yeah, you can kind of play around with and try to pick a state with a similar climate to another country. I guess that's a really good suggestion. And then a follow-up question to that one is the application, is there any payment needed to use this? And the answer to that is no. This application is totally free to any user. It was funded by the U.S. Forest Service, so we are not charging anyone to use the calculator, have access to it. Like I said, next week, once the calculator goes live on the new BTEC website, you'll just hit the Programs tab under the navigation bar on the new site, and it'll say Wood Energy Financial Calculator. You'll select that, and it'll shoot you over to this website where you can start using it for free. And all right, next question is there a companion narrative to the calculator that outlines what data is used for developing the calculator? Example, boiler cost database. Yes, actually, that's a really good question. We are going to post the spreadsheet that was used for the calculator inputs on the BTEC website as one of the resources for people to review and know what the inputs are for this calculator, the defaults, and all that sort of data. So stay tuned until next week when we announce the publication of the calculator, and yeah, you'll be able to look at that spreadsheet. Okay, and next question. I guess this could go to you, Bede. Is there a way to add other possibilities? Example of that is biochar production and sale or carbon credits.
I guess a simple answer to that is no. That I would say that this is really designed as a very front end qualifying tool. That's not to say it couldn't be used as a pathway into a more sophisticated project, but if you're asking, does the tool itself allow for creating revenue stream from generating biochar and so on? No. Probably if you're in a project at that level of sophistication, you're already past this point, and you're into a much more detailed evaluation.
Yeah, I think that's good. All right, next question. Can annual payments for thermal RECs be entered into the calculator? And it looks like this is a specific question for New Hampshire and Massachusetts. Bede, do you have any insights on that?
I don't believe the tool allows you to do that, but you could take the outputs and then modify your cash flow given those payments. A simple way to do it within the tool would be if you knew what your average thermal rec was going to be, you could actually go into the fuel cost. And so, for example, If my cost for green chips is $55 a ton, but I'm going to get the equivalent back from the state of New Hampshire and Thermorex for $30, I could simply make that adjustment right here and make it $25 a ton. And of course, that would drastically change the simple payback and the payback with interest number.
Yeah,
Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's more of a, you'll have to do a little bit more manual work on that. We don't really have a field for Rex on the calculator, so you just have to kind of manually edit the input and play with the calculator to get your answer on that. All right. All right, it looks like there are no other questions. I'll wait I'll wait about 15 seconds to see if anybody else has questions for our presenters. And if not, we can conclude and enjoy the weekend.
Let me add, Peter.
Oh yeah.
Just to jump in here, let me add thank you to the attendees for those last couple of questions. Hopefully this won't be the last time we revise the calculator. We also may be able to come up with some quick and easy ways for folks to use those additional inputs. So in the future, we will certainly make a note to see if there's a way to conveniently incorporate things like thermal recs. It does allow you to incorporate grant monies today in terms of the other sources of funding, but that's a good suggestion. We thank you for your question.
Definitely, yeah. We really do appreciate that feedback. We hope this isn't the last time we get to update this calculator. This has been a really important tool for the industry, I think, and it has a lot of potential to help people that are considering these modern wood heating systems. We kind of designed this calculator for the complete novice, if you will, so modern wood heating, so that they could just get a general estimate, like a school district or something. That's really the target audience for this calculator, as well as engineers and architects, just people who aren't totally familiar with what goes into a wood heating system. It looks like we have another question coming in. Is there a way to show a graph of the comparison between existing and biomass costs over 10, 20, or 30 years? And that's from Jim. Jim, I would say that on this calculator as it stands, no, we don't have a graphing function for the comparison between the existing and biomass costs over time. But I would certainly think that you could, with the inputs that you put into the calculator, could come up with a reasonable graph to chart those costs. B, do you have anything to add on Jim's question?
Yeah, I would just say right here on this page, where you have the biomass fuel costs and your remaining heating oil costs, that's information for your graph. So you could run this with no biomass and see what your costs are, and right next to it run a line for the biomass system set up this way using these numbers. And it certainly will generate the numbers that you need. It does not generate the graph, as Peter said.
Yeah. All right, it looks like that was our last question. Again, I want to thank our presenters and all of you for joining us for this demonstration of the newly updated Wood Energy Financial Calculator. And again, this will be up on the new BTEC website next week. We'll release a press release on this publication of the calculator, and well, we hope that you use it for your needs, and hopefully we can get some more people using wood to heat their homes, schools, hospitals, and other buildings. And I guess the presenters, do you have anything, last parting words before we conclude the webinar?
So I just want to thank you, thank Jeff, thank Chris for all his work, our providers for their work, and the attendees for their interest. On behalf of BTEC and the Technical and Regulatory Affairs Committee, we appreciate your interest.
Definitely. Thank you, Bede. And thank you, Dr. Becker, for joining us and giving us a little bit more background on the calculator. And with that, I'm going to conclude the webinar. Everybody enjoy the weekend. Have a happy Easter and enjoy the rest of this Good Friday. And thanks for joining us. All right. Bye, everyone.